All right. Hello, hello. Had some technical difficulties, but I am here. Good evening. I hope everyone's having a great day. I would like to give some time for folks to join us, but in the meanwhile, I'm going to offer some background about myself so you can get to know me a little bit better. My name is April Ruiz. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and my background is somewhat diverse. I have held jobs in retail, city government, education, philanthropy, grassroots nonprofit companies, and I've also subcontracted for researchers. So I have been educating for 19 years, and that has ranged from tutoring students individually to small group tutoring to teaching in middle schools to being a professor at the higher education level. So what I would like to do is, what I've done a few days ago is asked folks if there's anything they'd like to know about things related to education. So as you can imagine, in the time I've been working with students and families, I've gotten a lot of questions over the years about advice seeking things. So what school should I have my son in when he goes to high school? Or what classes should my daughter register for this fall? Or how do I know if my kids are being treated fairly at their school? And so I wanted to create a space and opportunity where I can share each week about my experiences and give my thoughts on different topics and take questions from people who may be interested in discussing further about these areas. So I am going to address the one person who had put a subject of discussion in the response to the post I made, where I basically said, please comment on topics you'd like me to cover. I'll be going live on Facebook. And so the topic I got was instructional technology, for example, virtual learning, and what are the pros and cons. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons. But before we get into that, I would like to say that instructional technology is somewhat wide in its range. So that's just a term we give to any type of software or platform or interface that is technological that allows people to learn. So typically when we think of instructional technology, we think of one of two things. We think of e-learning or we consider virtual learning. And so e-learning and virtual learning differ in that there are different levels of engagement between the two. So for e-learning, it's online instruction. You may or may not have a teacher. And I say that because a lot of times e-learning may involve a software robot or a program that facilitates the learning, or there may be a pre-recording that a teacher has made. But essentially, the work can be done at a student's own pace, typically, and according to their own schedule. Virtual learning typically involves a live teacher with a live classroom where you can ask questions in real time and you can interact with your peers in real time. And it is meant to be facilitated like a live session in a traditional classroom space, but it's conducted over the computer, the internet, or some technology, a tablet or phone, but typically computer. So I would like to share my thoughts on the pros and cons of each. With e-learning, I so I feel that one of the benefits of e-learning is that students who may have the aptitude and the self-direction and guidance to monitor their work, to stay on track, to adhere to a set schedule, e-learning may be a good option for those type of learners because there is heightened accountability set on the learner. Whereas in other formats, there may be someone directing them to do their work or raise your hand if you have any questions, things like that. But that is a benefit to those who may be able to work at their own pace and stay focused. for those who are not able to do one or both of those things, e-learning is not going to be as beneficial. So for example, if you have a student, like many students, who need accountability in real time, who need to have some redirection to stay focused, who need to adhere to a set schedule that is determined by someone who's in a teaching or otherwise authoritative position, that may be a difficult learning situation for scholars who opt for e-learning. Um, it's also not advantageous if they do have questions in real time and they're not able to get those questions answered because there is no one available in that format to answer questions for them. So with virtual learning, I think one of the benefits is that you have someone there in real time who can answer questions. If you have some inquiries or if you're stuck or you need something repeated, that's a huge benefit. If you are one who thrives off of interaction with other students, that's also really beneficial because you have a class there. You have several students who are learning at the same time. There are opportunities to chat. There are opportunities to solve things, answer questions at the time that the instruction is being facilitated. Some disadvantages to virtual learning are just the nature of being at home as opposed to in a physical space. I know personally I do better in a classroom setting because for one, I'm paying attention. I have other people around, so it helps me to stay focused, to know that there's a real time instruction taking place. And then also I have my introverted ways, but I've learned I'm more of an extrovert. So I really get energy from being around people and from learning alongside other people. And then if you have group projects or things you can work on with others, you can do it, at the same table or across from each other or go across the room or, as opposed to you're restricted with the virtual learning space in a virtual classroom. So that's a disadvantage. So I read an article on NPR, and I just wanted to share some of the highlights of that article that I took away. So overall, with the pandemic learning season that the world went through, particularly talking about the United States, most students learned far less than they would have. And that's probably not surprising that they would have learned more had we not been under the circumstances provided to us by the pandemic. But students learned far less for many reasons. Another point I took away is that students at high poverty schools were hit the hardest. And again, nothing new for most of us who pay attention in the world. So in my experience tutoring, I definitely saw a huge difference between students who, for example, go to private schools versus students who go to public schools. And even within those divisions of private versus public, there are certain schools that were better equipped to handle the consequences of the pandemic, the changing landscape of the pandemic versus others. And so overall, the students who were in the lower socioeconomic situations where they had fewer resources and were less equipped to respond to and handle how to pivot, as we learned to say so many times throughout the pandemic, they were hit the hardest, and it was harder for them to engage in learning for obvious reasons. Another point is that different states saw different gaps. So as we mentioned, the high poverty schools, were hit the hardest, but high poverty schools in states like California, Illinois, Kentucky, and Virginia spent 9 weeks more in remote instruction. And I would say from living in Michigan, what we experienced with some of our own schools going later into the school year, that's because there was a little bit of operating behind the curve when the pandemic first happened. because it took a while to adapt to, I mean, first of all, it was like everyone's caught like a deer in headlights. It took a while to assess what was going on and then to develop a plan. No one was prepared for this. So to develop a plan that would allow learning to continue to happen and get students learning safely. So, we're mapping social distancing with teaching, with bus systems, and it was just kind of a mess. So I think that's understandable why that was the case. High school graduation rates did not change much. And I would attribute that mostly to the fact that a lot of the standards were relaxed due to the pandemic. So if students were already behind, they weren't further penalized for being behind because of the pandemic's effects and the virtual learning taking place and all those other nuances. Folks that were pretty much on track to graduate still graduated, and folks that might not have been on track to graduate still graduated for the most part. Folks were not penalized. It was almost like, in my opinion, we should have taken a gap year, especially the first year during the pandemic, just to maybe level set the world, or at least the United States. It would have been nice to just see that, I don't know, nobody knows what's going on. So let's all just chill out and figure this out and start over later. I don't know. I understand that we had to keep things moving. I understand that we had to make sure students stayed engaged, make sure teachers, kept their jobs. But it was definitely a learning experience, I think, for us in how to better be prepared next time this may happen. Hopefully not, but you never know. Um, some high school graduates chose to delay college. And I also know from my experience working with high school students and college students, some of my students that were starting their freshman year of college when COVID-19 came down, they were kind of robbed of that first semester or second semester experience. And so a lot of them who were paying out of state tuition even were kind of justifying, like, I can just be at home. Why am I spending all of this money to sit in my dorm room and have kind of a halfway e-learning, halfway virtual learning facilitation of my education process? So I know some students came back home. Some students hung out on campus and kept it going as best they could to, find ways to cope and deal with it and keep pushing forward. But some students just chose not to go to college for the same reasons. If we have not the full experience as we're traditionally used to in higher ed, why would I start my path now? And so some folks chose not to do that. And then lastly, this is like a takeaway, but it's also kind of a charge or call for action. Schools can help. And what I'm excited about is the following. So for those of you who may not know, I own a company called Mosaic Masterminds. We are an educational support services company. As of today, August 17th, 2022, there are 25 of us in about 5 states. And we work with students in person and virtually, students of all ages, early elementary, middle school, high school, college, grad school, non-traditional work, skills, trades, you name it. And so research is telling us that high dosage tutoring can help get our students back on track. Now, this is high dosage tutoring, meaning a high frequency of tutoring, not every day, but taking 30 to 60 minutes 2 or 3 times a week. Because hands down, some of our students were behind the ball long before COVID came. So when you throw in a global crisis, it does not help their learning. It only made a lot of their situations worse. So to get us back to where we could be, high dosage tutoring is recommended by many thought leaders and scholars and by April. So I will see if we have any questions at this time. I'm seeing likes, which is exciting. I don't see any questions or any comments. I will wait a moment just in case someone would like to pop in and say something. But meanwhile, yes, I would just like to say that going forward, we're going to be doing this every week. Every Wednesday is the plan. So I want to be available to answer questions, to exchange and dialogue, get your ideas and thoughts, hear any concerns you may have about anything to do with your educational experiences, your scholars' educational experiences, if you have students in school. Yes, anything, all things education. So mosaicmasterminds.com is the website for our company. You can check out our awesome team there and read about us. And until then, till next week, we'll see you and have a great remainder of your week and weekend. Bye-bye.